Yes, well, that's where we're at. That's what I want to do. Put some heat
I remember you were thinking about maybe the answer is 3 weeks. Yeah. And I work with the melon.
Yeah, I just think like there's already been grant given, which is so stressful out here, and so if they can do our stuff, so.
Very much
Again, I don't know, maybe Tom's already got it. Yeah, but I meant like which department is which, is that, is it that, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, way back when. Sure.
Yeah, that's true.
You say this is fine.
Okay, sounds good.
Governor Schaefer and the President John.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to beautiful downtown Grand Forks, the home of the University of North Dakota. This is the time and place for the Grand Forks Growth Fund, a Jobs Development Authority. Item number 1, roll call.
Weigel?
Here.
Doppler? Here. Thank you. Weber?
Here.
Mock? Here. Kavami?
Here.
Sandy?
Here.
Veen? And he just stepped out, but he is present. Mayor?
Present. Here.
We have a quorum.
Very good, thank you. JDA action items 2.1, LM lease term change request. Ms. Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. As you may recall, this body approved back in July a project that was a combination of lease extension and a fit-up project in the old Amazon space to provide a canteen for LM employees. When that approval was given, Mr. Gostad started drafting a lease. When that lease was reviewed by GE's corporate attorneys, they wanted to make a few changes based primarily on their policy to limit lease extensions to 3 years. Our initial approach was to try to really incent LM to renew for that second 3-year term. But in any case, the requested changes are outlined in your staff report. The original terms are listed with then the requested changes to follow. Originally, it was just a 3-year extension with incentives. There's nothing changed in that particular piece. Originally, the fit-up cost was going to be absorbed fully by the JDA if LM did agree to that second extension. Because of their desire to limit their extensions to 3 years, they're agreeing to fully amortize that fit-up cost. Preferably, it will stay at that $175,000 or less, but whatever that fit-up cost is, LM will amortize it over the 3-year term at 2%. If it is that $175,000, that equates to about $5,000 a month that they would just start paying immediately upon completion of that project when the new lease kicks in. The base rate of $4.90 a square foot is maintained, no change to that. And then finally, the original request included some incentives that would defer and then forgive some of the rent. LM has requested that due to COVID and cash flow issues that they have 7 months of rent deferred. Originally, that would be forgiven if they made the second renewal along with all of that fit-up cost going away. Their request now is to continue to have that forgiveness, but that would kick in after the 3 years with deferred rent then repaid in the last 3 months of that lease. I believe that we have, I hope, LM representatives on the line if you have any questions, but that is kind of a summary of what was approved originally and what Growth Fund Committee recommended to go ahead with these changes as I just presented at their meeting last month. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
We'll open a public hearing on 2.1. Do we have any public input, or does anyone wish to speak to this item? We'll close the public hearing, open to questions or comments from JDA members.
Move approval?
We have a motion from Mr. Kafami, second from Mayor Brzezinski. With the motion on the floor, any further comments or questions? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you, Ms. Doctor. Motion passes. Item 2.2, Cirrus, request to exercise purchase option and purchase of adjacent lot or parcel. Good evening, Mr. King. Ms. Richards.
I'm eager to let Mr. King have the podium, but I'm going to run through the more mundane stuff real quick. As you know, we've had like a 25-year relationship with Cirrus, very strong, as has been built into their lease agreement for the last 15 years. They have a purchase option to buy the facility for $1.9 million. That was going to be at the conclusion of their current lease, which was the end of March. Mr. King produced the request that is part of your staff report and requested that option be moved up so that they could take possession or take ownership of the building by year end. That was presented at Growth Fund Committee last time, and it was recommended to approve that advancement. In the time since, city staff has been working with Mr. King on the potential to purchase an adjoining vacant parcel. If you look at your staff report, which includes the lease, there's an aerial photograph that kind of outlines the portion of the lot that is going to be purchased as part of that 1.9 million deal, and then the adjacent lot, which we have offered and which they have requested to purchase for $1.50 a square foot, which is approximately $300,000. That's been kind of the going price for lots in the industrial park over the last few years. And basically this purchase really kind of squares up the parcel for Cirrus, as well as really solidifies this site as the spot for them to expand without looking any further. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. King to say a few words.
Good evening, Mr. King, and welcome to Grand Forks.
Thank you so
Always
much.
good to see you.
It's great to be here tonight. Thank you so much. Starting first of all from sort of a high level and then working down just a bit, the whole idea of exercising our purchase option, as you know, has been long in the making for us. Certainly something we've been excited about, and hopefully everybody here is too. This certainly turns a page on the relationship and takes us from simply being tenants of a building and a longtime tenant at that to being owners out here, and we are just honored. We've always seen Grand Forks as part of our home, and for those of you who have been around as long as I have, you'll recall the early days when we have been up here since the early 90s, believe it or not, working on projects. So we're honored to be here tonight. We have expressed interest in the additional property, and we're so grateful to Meredith and the team for working with us. That certainly makes sense for us to acquire the adjacent property, not just the building and the land it sits on, because it does allow for some logical expansion, assuming that is forthcoming in the not too distant future, we hope. And as part of that, it keeps us from really splitting up and being forced to kind of spread out as we grow our operations. It's much more efficient, of course, to do that on one site. So we're grateful to the JDA and the city for entertaining that discussion tonight. So thank you for that. I would be remiss if I didn't just take a minute to remind everybody that it was back in 1996 when we struck the original deals and for actually doing the first of the expansions out here in Grand Forks. And somewhere I know Dick Olson is looking down snickering saying, "I told you so." He knew this day would come when we'd actually exercise that option. And I think of people like Terry Hansen and John O'Leary and so many of the players out here, certainly many of you on the council, certainly UND, the people that have made this project be what it is today. I'll get choked up if I don't stop this. It's humbling. There's no other word for it. It's humbling to be here tonight and say thank you for your forbearance, for all of your effort, all of your investment over the years. We'd like to think we've been a good investment, but as I'm fond of saying, literally when I've spoken all over the country about economic development, and I do get invited to do those sorts of presentations now and then, I've been so quick to say that, the poster child for economic development done right is really right here in Grand Forks. It's just truly, you guys make it easy, and you make it fun, and you make it enjoyable, and at the sum of all of that is profit, right? And we always said when we started this business, we want to change the world, we want to have a lot of fun, and we want to make money. And any two of those, and not all three, does not make for a net win. And we're here tonight to tell you we've had a lot of fun, we've made some money, right? And we have changed the world, and we've done that with your help. And that's not lost on us. So Chairman, the team, and we do see you as part of our team, thank you for all of your investment, your energy, your faith in us, and your commitment to us. With this, we wouldn't be here tonight without Keith, without Klaus, without the Dick Olsons, Carl Bollingberg, Randy Newman, all the financial players here in town that were so instrumental in helping us figure out how on earth are we going to try and come together and finance this crazy airplane company that had a kid airplane and a lot of really good ideas that said we were going to change the world. And you guys believed in us when a lot of people didn't. So thank you. We're humbled and we're excited about what this means to us. We're excited about closing before the end of the year. How on earth we get all the paperwork done to do that, I have no idea. But if it can be done, I know it'll be done here and it'll be done by this team. So thank you again, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Very good. The city has benefited from your presence for years now, and it's welcome news indeed that you're making this next level of commitment to the community. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
Take care of some business. We'll open a public hearing on item 2.2. Do we have any comments? Anyone in the audience?
We do not.
No comments received. Closed public hearing. Looking for questions or comments from council members. Mayor Buczynski.
Yeah, Mr. King, I'd just like to say thank you for your commitment to our community to not only exercise this purchase option, but also, paying market price and paying for that lot as well. All this amidst a pandemic and economic uncertainty, so we can't be, you've given us a lot of praise, but I think we have to give you some as well. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Mr. King, it's always a pleasure. I'll move approval.
We have a motion for Mr. Sandy.
Second.
Second for Mr. Weigel. With the motion on the floor, any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Very good. Item 2.3, the C-Run EDA RLF adoption plan. Ms. Richards.
Thank you. You saw a draft version of this plan back in August. Just to back up a little bit, EDA is, as part of the CARES Act, granted approximately $1.4 million to the Growth Fund to set up this COVID response revolving loan fund. In the months since, we've brought you a draft plan, and based on that draft plan, EDA allowed us to go ahead and start the process. So we have accepted applications. Those will be coming through Growth Fund Committee later this month, and then to the JDA in December. Based on our experience, as well as EDA's review of our initial draft plan, we've got a few changes. Those are outlined in your staff report, and I'll just highlight them. Originally, we took a very cautious approach to the funding. We didn't know whether the demand would be huge, minimal. We've kind of found that it's just there. Not overwhelming, but there seems to be steady interest in this program. So our initial approach was to limit loans to $25,000 just to make sure that everybody that wanted access to this money got a shot at it, with the option to increase that in a second tranche. As we submit the final plan, we're recommending that it just be a maximum loan of $50,000 because the demand, while it seems to be steady, it doesn't appear to be overwhelming. There were some other elements about, incentivizing either providing a personal guarantee or giving a reduced interest rate or increased deferral for that. Again, based on demand, that doesn't really seem warranted. I think the only other real substantive change was that we have included at EDA's behest a 2-year cool-down period, as they call it, so that nobody from either the JDA or the Growth Fund Committee can access these loan funds for at least 2 years following their exit from either body. Other than that, it's pretty much as we approved it with some probably pretty substantial tinkering in a bureaucratic fashion, but we're asking tonight for final adoption of the plan, which will then be submitted to EDA. We don't have the final draft in front of you. It's the plan that was attached does not include the appendix. That will come, waiting for Mr. Gosted to give us a final thumbs up on our draft loan documents, but we're 99% there. So with that, don't need to hold a public hearing on this. There's no money involved at this point, just asking for final approval of the plan.
And that final approval is contingent upon review from the city attorney, is that correct?
Correct. He's working on those draft loan documents. It'll be the last piece of the appendix.
Very good, thank you. Questions or comments from JDA members? Looking for a motion? We don't need a
I
motion.
don't think we need a motion.
To approve the plan, yes.
Yes, please.
Move approval.
Motion for Mr. Weigel, second for Mr. Vian. Further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Item 2.4, JDA leadership position discussion. Mr. Phelan.
Hey, JDA President, members of the Jobs Development Authority. Staff has summarized some of the discussion that has gone on, and first I want to point out one thing. The first thing was the Growth Fund Committee expansion, and I think Mr. Bill King said it well, and isn't he a lovely guy? Great guy. And I love when he shows up here because he provides lots of inspiration. Really, economic development should be fun, should be exciting, and it should be well done, and we try to do all those things. So I think at the heart of this agenda item is that. And this is supposed to be strategic. So on the first was growth fund, and leading up to this, the godforsaken pandemic, we were looking at big ideas of expanding the Growth Fund Committee, and we were looking at expanding. Currently, right now, as you know, there's 3 city council members and there's 2 at-large members that are appointed, or I guess recommended by the EDC. There was a sense of what's wrong with having a majority of non-city council members, as that, I suspect back in the day, a city council always wanted to maintain some control, and if you're 3-2. But there was a sense of why don't we broaden it out and have more at-large members, and whether they come from the EDC or somewhere else, we should have that further discussion. Also, pre-pandemic JDA there was discussion about what kinds of professions or experiences people should have so they could have a diverse and really strategic board on the Growth Fund. There was a kind of a robust discussion about moving forward with that. The pandemic hit in March, and we kind of set it aside for a little while. And I think now we're back to it. And I think we should be really thankful. Let's think of Cirrus, that our economy has really kept humming along. And we never thought that would happen, to be frank, in March. And we're really at an enviable position right now. So that was this discussion there. As you know, in the staff report, the city council has to make these modifications. But I think the sense tonight is to have a discussion as a JDA to see if they want to move it on to a committee of the whole and city council to make those arrangements. We can certainly work with the EDC too. On moving forward in a large group. I think secondly, and I think, again, Mr. King spoke about this, this isn't about watering down or, hey, we need a quorum because people aren't showing up. This should be about strategy. It's about going into our new economy and all the things that we have going on. Let's have a board that can really add a lot of strength and precision and enlarge our vision as a city administration. Obviously, the mayor leads our vision. And as staff, we're supposed to implement that. And it's really important, whether it's a city council or Jobs Development Authority, that we have a strategic board that can not get to know, but to make our ideas and our execution better. That's what makes us better as administrative staff. And I just want to point out a few things that we have in front of you, is that the JDA and the Growth Fund, we've had larger and larger agenda items with real things moving forward, not just, rubber stamp kinds of things. But if you think of the opportunities we have moving forward, the sale of Corporate 1 and 2, that can start yet this fall, most likely will happen sometime next year, and hopefully in the first quarter. That'll be a, $9 to $10 million deal. Some of it will go to CDBG. The rest will be in the city's hands to reinvest strategically. the Grand Forks Regional Water Treatment Plant. Likely, when we start to redevelop that facility, that will likely end up in the growth fund or the JDA's hands for a further redevelopment, just so we have more moves on what we want to do. That's going to be another strategic thing as we move forward. EDA grants, and Meredith was up here talking about EDA grants earlier, but we have submitted the EDA construction grant regarding the Grand Forks Herald to create a tech accelerator. And so, hopefully in November here, we hear some good news. That's going to be another JDA-owned building, and how do we grow that tech sector with our partnering with our private sector? And finally, LIFT funds. We talked about LIFT funds and how do we match. There's a lot of really terrific things that we're doing, and so what we're looking at as staff is on the growth fund and JDA, how do we have strategic leadership? And what we use leadership for on the growth fund committee side and also the JDA is to refine agendas, to refine thoughts, so that when we show up here, there is a sense of what the group really wants to move forward. And so that's what we're really looking for. And that's what we really appreciate about the JDA and in the city council, is that we're adding value to one another and trying to really make things better. Mr. Sandy, or Council President Sandy, did ask earlier today, and I think a really good question was asked. Generally, over our history, our modern history, the Growth Fund Chair and the JDA President have been different people. When we looked over modern history, and Sherry didn't have enough time to go back, further than, we'll say, the late 90s, it's generally been a city council member that's been both president of the JDA and a growth fund chair, has generally been a city council member. They have been different people, except for the last 2 years when council president, or JDA President Weber was both the chair of growth fund and the JDA. Otherwise, there were different folks just for that group. So I think tonight we have in front of you discussion on growth fund, on whether we should move that forward and the arrangement. We can start working some of the details if we get some feedback. And the other thing is the leadership, I think, of the JDA, that now that we've settled the growth fund chair and vice chair discussion. So with that, President Weber, I'll hand it back to you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Phelan. With this agenda item, we're here to discuss the best way forward for the city's economic development and economic health, and that and nothing else must be our guiding focus. We have two issues before us. The first is the composition of the Growth Fund Committee and the makeup of its members. The Growth Fund Committee requests that the JDA consider allowing it to expand its size to have greater representation of the community's business-related expertise. This is not so much about solving a problem, but an opportunity for the Growth Fund Committee to be more proactive, smarter, and representative. In my role as chair of that committee, I first introduced this idea some time ago, and my hope is to provide a greater voice for community members and to expand the knowledge base of the committee. The proposal has always enjoyed unanimous support from the Growth Fund Committee members. However, the pressing needs of responding to COVID, as Mr. Phelan has noted, have sidetracked that effort. At this time, the committee has asked that this be brought to the JDA, since changing the size and composition of the Growth Fund Committee will require an ordinance change. While this needs to be discussed by the JDA, both the JDA and the Growth Fund Committee were created in City Code by the Council. So it's my hope that we can discuss their request this evening and submit a proposal to the Committee of the Whole for eventual consideration by City Council. So once again, the Growth Fund Committee is seeking guidance from the JDA members regarding a requested expansion from 5 members, as Mr. Phelan has noted, currently 3 from Council and 2 nominees from the EDC, to either 7 or 9 members, looking for guidance here, with both expansions coming from an increase in nominees from the EDC. There's also been discussion about those additional nominees coming from either specific areas of expertise, whether that might be real estate, entrepreneurial activity, etc., or from specific geographic designations such as parts of the city or outlying counties, possibly specific organizations such as the Red River Regional Council, or even from other political entities. And that is the first question before us tonight that we need to wrestle with. So I'm asking for comments or questions and hopefully a motion. Mayor Paczynski, please.
Yeah, I think bumping it up to 7 and then just figuring out so we have some diversity on there of what fields they're in is probably the best front. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you need to narrow down exactly what sector they need to be in, but just as giving the EDC some guidance on where those 4 come from. But I think 7's good.
Yeah, I agree, and I'd make a motion that we would expand the growth fund to 7 members pending EDC guidance on where those members would come from.
We have a motion on the floor? We have a second, and Mr. Sandy? Council President Sandy?
Thank you, Mr. Weber. I think the influence that the Economic Development Corporation has on the Growth Fund with the input that they provide on the membership of the Growth Fund is very important. I think similarly, though, I'm not sold on the fact that the city council or the city of Grand Forks only has one member of the EDC Board of Directors. And as part of this, I would like to see the chair of the Growth Fund be permanently put as part of the EDC's charter membership, because we don't know who's going to be the chair of the Growth Fund 5 years from now or 25 years from now, but that person should be going to those meetings and knowing what the EDC Board of Directors is talking about. So I'm more than happy to support the move to 7. I'd like to see the EDC Board of Directors take up that discussion and permanently place the chair of the Growth Fund as part of that board.
Any further questions or comments? So with yes, Ms. Mock? Vice President Mock?
Is that something that someone can bring forward to the EDC? Is that, do we need to make that an official
I believe
recommendation?
Mr. Lund is here, he's heard it.
So
and
that's
I'm
taken care of? Okay.
I'm guessing that'll be discussed by the EDC board. Yeah. Very good. Yes, Mr. Bean.
So I just have a question here. The makeup right now has 3 city council and 2 from the EDC, right? So we will now switch that so so the city council no longer has a majority of the vote that's on them. And I'm not against that. I'm trying to figure out what the benefit of this would be for us. The city council members are elected, of course. These others are appointed. I'd like to just hear more of the rationale, how that brings better value to us. It does bring diversity. I think that's for sure one thing. And the ultimate decision still comes back to the Job Development Authority, right?
Right. So in ordinance, it's the job of the Growth Fund Committee to be the first reviewers of deals brought forward by the EDC. However, the JDA is not required in any way to adhere to the Growth Fund Committee or even to wait for the Growth Fund Committee. The JDA can always act unilaterally. They have that authority in code. So this is really just an advisory body. The two are separate. So this gives an opportunity for greater representation from the community and actually providing a little more distance between these two separate entities. Mr. Sandy, you wanted to say something?
Well, I believe to answer your comment, Ken, not that we're not all experts in economic development, but the EDC and their board, they spend time thinking about and learning about and working towards economic development for our community. And I believe that they have people that are on their board or they know of people in our community that can provide guidance for us, not knowing that economic development isn't necessarily what all of us do every day, but there are people in our community that do that. And so I believe that that would bring a lot of value, having more people that's what they do during their daily lives, whether they're in, again, whether in the ag sector or whether in another government sector or whether they're in banking and finance. There are people in a diverse number of fields that are spending their time working on developing our community and developing business in our community. And I believe that increasing the number of people that are on the Growth Fund that come from industry that do this for a living would bring value to the recommendations that ultimately come to the JDA. That's
Mr. Veen,
And if I could, the way I understand it, we'll probably have those recommendations. The way I understand it, we'll also have those recommendations if there are certain sectors that need to be represented on the growth fund too?
I believe that's part of the discussion, right, is that the EDC would, was it the EDC that you're recommending would provide us the recommendations as to industry or geography or whatever?
That's my understanding of the motion as it stands. Mr. Weigel.
To maybe address some of Mr. Veen's concerns, that what if we had 3 from the EDC, 3 members appointed by the EDC, we've got 3 from the council, and have 1 from the mayor's office that's appointed. That way you've got 3 from really the legislative side of the city. You've got 3 from the EDC board, and then the mayor appoints 1 as well. That could make up our 7.
That sounds quite distinct from the spirit of the motion as I understood it, but...
Just an idea that I'd throw out there.
So it's a comment?
I'm open to the idea. I think my intent in the motion is just that the growth fund that advises the JDA is not the same committee, and that's the spirit of my motion, is that there's some difference there. So I'm open to the discussion of where those come from, I think, as long as we have the EDC represented.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah,
Sandy.
with all due respect to the mayor, and I'm sure he would do a very good job of choosing someone for the position. Keith London, the Economic Development Corporation, this is what they do for a living for our community. So, again, I'm sure the mayor would do fine. I, for one, we have a known quantity, and in 16 years, we may have another mayor that has no wherewithal for choosing people. I would rather have the people that do this for a living choosing the people that do this for our community. Thank you.
So we do have a motion. Anything further? Hearing nothing further, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. The second issue has less to do with either economic development or the city's economic health, and is primarily a political challenge. Some years ago, I think about 5 years ago, the JDA members agreed unanimously that there was a natural synergy between the JDA and the Growth Fund Committee, and that there would be benefit in having the same person serve as chair for both. There is no restriction against the JDA acting unilaterally from the Growth Fund Committee. The two are separate. The JDA is not dependent on the Growth Fund Committee. As such, there is no inherent conflict in the same person chairing both. Indeed, there is benefit in the right hand knowing what the left hand is doing. The city attorney has twice noted, once at a meeting of the JDA and once at a meeting of the Growth Fund Committee, that there is no preclusion under either the city ordinance or the North Dakota Century Code from a person holding the position of chair for both entities. To alter that previous decision would now require a change in the city ordinance, which would need to go through the process of committee of the whole and 2 readings by the council. In a recent discussion with Council President Sandy, he and I considered what to do if ever there's a request for a new vote on something that's already been decided. We both agreed that if a member of the council or the JDA asks for any matter to come forward for discussion or for a change to the agenda, regardless of how we felt about the specific matter, we support an open, transparent, democratic decision-making process. However, this is different since the vote was an election of officers. It's unclear what the JDA's or the council's process is for reconsidering an election vote, especially in the absence of any explicit problem. Whether for chair of a committee or a new vote regarding council leadership, there is no clear way forward on this. Further, city code does not actually designate any process for leadership of the Grand Forks, of the Growth Fund Committee. Indeed, I believe it is silent on the whole matter of how the Growth Fund Committee is to operate. Instead, it appears that the current leadership structure has primarily been a matter of practice. For instance, there was no requirement that there be an election of officers at the Growth Fund Committee. I introduced that as a matter of proposed practice so that there could be a reconsideration of that committee's leadership around the same time that there is a change in the JDA membership. Otherwise, I believe that you'll find that we went several years without any election for the Growth Fund Committee, for a change in the Growth Fund Committee leadership. This area of discussion was raised at the Growth Fund Committee. Community members there noted that they agreed to serve to provide economic development input, but they did not wish to get embroiled in what clearly seems to be a political discussion. So it's unclear to me exactly what is being asked at this time, but with that, I open the floor to comments and questions.
Mr. Kavam. So based on our prior conversations with the Growth Fund and this discussion that we just had about expanding the memberships from 5 to 7, so that we had a different committee making recommendations to the JDA and not just the same composition, I would make a motion to reconsider the previous vote on leadership for JDA.
We have we have a motion to reconsider the June vote. Is that
correct?
Very good.
I'll
Do we have a second? Okay, we have a second. So we have a motion to reconsider the June vote for JDA chair, for JDA leadership.
Correct.
Correct. Questions or comments with the motion on the floor? President Sandy.
Thank you. Mr. Costa, would this be the standard practice if there was some discussion about the leadership of the JDA and people wanted to reconsider the leadership, would the process be to reconsider that vote, or is it spelled out in city code?
It is not spelled out in the city code as to the process for changing leadership on the JDA. However, any matter could be subject to reconsideration, and I think that's what the motion is right now, is simply to have the JDA reconsider that vote. If that motion then passes, then you would have a revote on the leadership of the JDA. So it'd be two separate motions. First one would be first to see if the motion for reconsideration would be approved by a majority vote, and if that passes, then you would have a second vote to nominate and for the balance of the term.
Can you refresh my memory? What are all the positions, the leadership positions within the JDA, and who currently has those positions?
With the JDA, there's a chairperson, a vice chairperson, and a secretary treasurer.
Who are the officers?
I think Mr. Weber is chairperson. I'm not confident who the chairperson is or the secretary treasurer.
I believe that's Mr. Vian as vice chair and Mr. Weigel as the secretary treasurer.
I see. Thank you, Mr.
Mayor Rachinski.
Well, I think in the spirit of being transparent and to make sure that there's not necessarily one person championing something through. I mean, generally you have someone that recommends something to a different board and that board takes over. Not that I don't think Mr. Weber would do a phenomenal job, and I've seen him do well, and I think he'll continue to do well if it goes that way on the Growth Fund, and it's been quite a pleasure working with him on that. But I do think that has been talked about for a while. Having those be separate positions, I think that makes a lot of sense. It removes any possibility of a conflict of interest. I think that just recently, in the last 2 years, is the only time that has actually been the same person. In the past, it's always been separated, so I would say that the current situation is out of precedent, and probably having two people is in precedent, so it's definitely something to consider. I think, at this point, it's something I would probably be voting for, so.
Mr. Vian.
Mr. Gosta, just a question on reconsideration of, let's say, typically a motion. Does that have to typically be made in a certain time frame?
I don't believe that that there is a particular time frame. I'd have to, I don't know the precise answer. I think you could bring that motion for reconsideration up at any time later on. I don't think there is a time parameter to that.
Okay. That would be one of the questions I wanted to. The other one would be, if we do have, and I'm understanding where people are coming from for the same person, could since, I don't know, it's not necessarily required or how the vote takes place on the job, or on the growth fund, could we now, when we are doing the additional 2 people, have the growth fund do their election and elect potentially a new person versus the vote that we have already taken here as a city council?
Well, I'll note that in June, I was unanimously elected to this position, and at the October meeting, I was unanimously elected to chair of the Growth Fund Committee. I'm not sure why but I'm certain that we could do that, yes. Mr. Sandy.
Just because we do know the city council, this body voted for this position, and that was a vote that still exists today. We obviously didn't vote for the other one.
Right.
You've also identified that there's nothing, no specific protocol or whatever for how that is done on the growth fund.
Right. In fact, I don't believe there's even any requirement in code that the Growth Fund Committee even have a chair. I think that's just been a matter of practice. Yeah. Mr. Sandy.
So, what Mr. Goss said, the term of the JDA chair is 2 years, is that correct? So after each election, the city council, the then new city council elects a new chair to the JDA.
To answer your question, Councilmember Sandy, the ordinance says they are to be elected annually.
Annually?
Yes, and to answer the question to Mr. Veen, I'm looking at the city council conduct of council meetings. It's section 2.104 with respect to motions for reconsideration, and a motion for reconsideration can be made. It requires a vote to 4 people. There is no time parameter that's set out in the city council under the ordinance.
So 4 as a majority in a council.
Correct.
That would be the case for council, and we're looking for a similar majority in the JDA.
That would be an accurate statement.
Do we have any concept of when we would do the expansion of the Growth Fund Committee?
I can answer that. It's going to take 2 readings of an ordinance change. So the next city council meeting would be 2 weeks from today, and then 2 weeks after that would be the second reading.
You would need to go through Cal first, though?
It's a recommendation, but the city council ultimately has to pass 2 readings. So I'm thinking of the next council meeting is going to be 2 weeks from today would be the first reading, and then the second reading would be 4 weeks from today.
And do we believe economic development can come up with a couple more people so that we can then get those people on board in November?
That seems a tall order. Mr. Lund?
December?
Chairman Revers, member of the JDA. November seems a little aggressive in my mind. I'm thinking we have a board meeting in just a couple of days on Thursday. Certainly we'll brief them on this discussion and their action today, understanding that it does take 2 readings, and that would occur near the end of November. I would expect that we, just thinking really quickly on my feet, that we would make recommendations or take action at our board at our meeting in December, and bring those forward. So whatever time frame that would meet in terms of your next city council meeting, it might be mid-December by the time the city council, which ultimately ratifies those recommendations, takes action.
Sure, so the first meeting would be in January, perhaps.
A new year and a new day.
Sure. So, Mr. Gosted, thank you, Mr. Lund.
Thank you.
The Growth Fund Committee, is it factual that in our city ordinance there is no designated chair of the Growth Fund Committee?
There's nothing in the ordinance that talks about who is the chairperson, how that gets elected.
So all that time I was taking orders from Christensen, I didn't have to?
I take orders from Christensen.
How is this possible?
And just so I understand though, is that this vote is not with respect to the growth fund and the size of the growth fund or who the chairperson is of the growth fund. This is of the JDA, which is separate. So
I understand that.
The timing of the expansion of the growth fund is not necessarily limited by this particular motion.
But seeing as we're talking about the JDA and the growth fund, I think it's an error that we don't have officers designated within the growth fund. And I think that we probably should have that ordinance changed. Additionally, I'm curious, are there any limitations on, for example, the chair of the JDA in the ordinance? Can the mayor be the chair of the JDA?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's also an error. I think that is intended to be a council member. I think that should be changed, that ordinance should be changed as well. I don't know that, but that's just me. Everyone else is welcome to their opinion. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor Buczynski, please.
Well, I think if we're cleaning up ordinances, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to expand the growth fund, and we can do that with another motion, I would imagine, or, recommendation out of here, to not only expand it to 7, but to have set officers for that. And then if they want to change the wordage on the JDA to remove the mayor from being able to be a chair, I think that's, certainly in order too. If that's what people think, I think that makes a lot of sense personally, that's a council member. So if we want to do some ordinance changes, we could keep you busy, that's for sure, so.
Yeah. And I think if you're considering making sure that there's a bifurcation between the leadership, between the growth committee and the JDA, that also be included within the ordinance so that then there is clarity going forward, if that's the wishes of the city council.
Although at this point, the motion we're considering is to call back the vote from June on the assumption that there is a conflict in leadership between the elected chair of the JDA and the practicing chair of the Growth Fund Committee, which actually doesn't exist in code. So other than the comments from members of this entity, I am not aware of any concern in the business community or elsewhere about any conflict between those two positions. But Mr. Weigel, yes, please.
If something goes to the Growth Fund Committee and it receives a vote of 3 noes and 2 yeses, what happens?
The same way that the Committee of the Whole,
so
the recommendation comes forward in the vote, but the JDA would still consider it. In fact, the JDA, once again, as I mentioned earlier, has no obligation to the Growth Fund Committee. The JDA can act completely unilaterally. We can consider policies, deals completely independent of the Growth Fund. It's a completely separate entity. They're simply to provide the first screening of deals presented by the EDC.
Then my question would be, I'm in favor. I think I said this back in June when we elected you, Mr. Weber, that while you're here and you're great to have on the council, you're not always going to be here. And I like the idea of two separate chairs for that fact, because it's not going to be us 7 up here all the time where we can have conversations, even though one of us may not agree or a couple may not agree, we can come to some sort of resolution. I have a feeling it's not always going to be that way. And so when I look at that, and I look at the growth fund, they're hearing these things and they're passing it on to us here at the JDA. If 2 separate chairs aren't needed, then do we need to even vote on anything at the JDA? Because vote on anything at the growth fund because it automatically comes to the JDA. So maybe that's a committee that just sits here and hears the idea And we don't need a chair there, and we also don't need any votes on whether anything should come to the JDA, because that's essentially what we're doing. If there's no difference between the two, then a vote of the JDA or the growth fund should not matter. And so really there should be no votes, there should be no chairs, there should be no chair of that committee, and they should really just sit there and listen to the idea, because no matter what, it's coming to the growth fund. And so that's where I get torn, because if we vote no against it, yes, we still hear it, but that growth fund has weight. If I hear 2 business leaders in our community and 3 council members vote against something, that carries weight to me here on the JDA, because I value your guys' input on what you're doing. But what I'm hearing is that it really doesn't matter if one person chairs, because it's still going to come here. But I do think that vote has weight, and I think that the chair being separate is a good thing between our 2 committees here.
So now a lot of this discussion is focused on consideration of ordinance, but the motion before us right now is whether or not to reverse or to call into question the vote from June. Were there, Mr. Yes, Ms. Mock, please. Vice President Mock.
That's an interesting point, Mr. Weigel. I guess in my head, I always kind of think of the JDA, or the growth fund, maybe more like planning and zoning. And because it's a separate meeting, you still need someone to lead the meeting. And so, planning and zoning also has a chair that's leading that meeting and doing that discussion. So I guess that I was thinking of it as the same. I agree, I take those recommendations seriously if they, recommend not supporting something, or if they recommend that you do support something, I take that seriously because they have relationships or they've heard more presentations and details. But I guess in my mind, we have to have that discussion, because if that's an oversight, perhaps we need to correct that with the ordinance and say that we need a designated chairperson. And then it kind of comes back to that point of, do we want to make the clarification that we'd like to see 2 different people in those 2 different positions, because we could include that in the ordinance, and then that would impact perhaps reconsidering the JDA position, because I believe in October they just elected you growth fund chair.
That's correct.
But perhaps we need to have some of those discussion points and decide that, and then work backwards for this particular consideration on the JDA.
Very good, thank you.
Just
Mr.
real
Michael.
quick,
Yes.
Ms. Mock, I agree with you for somebody to lead the meeting, but I spent 2 years on the growth fund, and Mr. Phelan attended every meeting, Meredith attended every meeting, Mayor Brown, I believe, attended every meeting. So we wouldn't need a chair. We've got more than enough city staff to guide us through the process of listening to the meetings, listening to the presentations, and going from there. So that was kind of my point, that we've got more than enough people there to take on those tasks and those duties, that it really wouldn't needed to be a chairperson or really a committee that votes on anything. It's more or less a listening session.
Yes, Mr. Phelan.
I think and this has been my history, Mayor Brown was very delegative in putting together agendas, both City Council and Growth Fund and JDA. I think moving forward, what the chair does, we do engage a leader of the Growth Fund to say, here are the agenda items. So there is some informal authority, I would say. And Mayor Paczynski has gotten more engaged on, what the Growth Fund Committee agenda looks like. So I'd just say from if you're wondering how things get on the Growth Fund, we do confer now currently with the chair of the Growth Fund and also with Mayor Paczynski before we, formally put things on the agenda. So leadership does matter, I would say, on this. And in this case, if we didn't have a chair of the Growth Fund, we would defer to our mayor as part of, obviously, that's what I would do.
Could the mayor and JDA chair confer on the agenda for the Growth Fund Committee?
They could, yeah. And generally, the mayor's my boss, so at the end of the day, I say, this is what we're going to do, Mayor. And because he has formal authority over me, right? And that's the direction. So without a chair, that's my go-to, is I just go to to my boss, the mayor, and say, here's what we're planning on the agenda. Meredith helps construct it, but just so you know how things work behind the scenes when things get on the Growth Fund Committee agenda.
Mr. Kavami?
So in this thought, I feel that the path forward might be to rescind my prior motion. So can I formally do that, or?
Before you do that, I want you to be advised that once a matter for reconsideration has been brought up, it can't be brought up again. So if you're going to rescind your motion for reconsideration for the vote, the next meeting of JDA, you're not going to be able to ask that the JDA reconsider again the vote. With that said, however, it would seem logical to me that then the extension is going to be working through the ordinance and delineating in the ordinance how what the positions are going to be and who can hold those positions, the qualifications of the chairperson for both the JDA and the Growth Fund, because you would be then considering an ordinance going forward. It wouldn't be a reconsideration of that particular vote.
And that would
If
be
that makes sense.
that'd be my intent, is to then motion for that after. Or would that go to council?
That's a council matter.
Fair.
President Sandy?
Sorry, for the both deft and daft person in the room, can you explain that one more time?
It wasn't,
So Mr. Kavami made a motion to reconsider and it was seconded. We haven't voted on it. And he can't now rescind his motion to reconsider? And if he does do that, we can never move to reconsider that vote again?
the way I'm reading the ordinance is it says a motion for reconsideration if law shall not be again repeated at the same meeting of the council, nor shall any question be reconsidered more than once.
But we haven't,
Excuse me,
yeah,
yes, more than once.
but we haven't voted on it. So, I mean, I appreciate your opinion. My opinion would be if we don't vote on it, we actually haven't reconsidered. And so then we can't bring it up and try to reconsider again.
Yeah, I'm reading.
I know you're reading on the
Yep.
fly, I get that. I'm not the attorney, but I would guess that the intention is if we vote and to reconsider and then vote somebody else in, we can't then vote and reconsider again. So that's the way I would interpret that. So I think personally, Mr. Kavami, I think your motion to rescind your motion, your concept to rescind your motion, I believe makes sense. We should wait until we get the ordinance cleaned up. Come January, we reappoint some folks to the Growth Fund, and then we're only 5 months away before we vote again on the new JDA president, and we can avoid all sorts of controversy and hard feelings if we just wait another 9-10 months from now. So I think that's a great plan, Mr. Kavami, good idea.
Mr. Kavami?
So no further actions needed then?
Well,
If you're withdrawing your motion, as I understand it, then this matter will be cleaned up through ordinance changes.
And regardless of the motion, if the ordinance changes, then the leadership would have to change if there's an ordinance change,
depending on the ordinance.
depending on.
Depending on what the outcome of that ordinance change, and that's what I was suggesting, is that you do this through the ordinance change, and at that moment, when the ordinance has been passed on a second reading, and there is now a qualification as to who can be a chairperson, at that moment, then the matter would have to be resolved.
So I would confirm my rescind of my motion then.
And then, Mr. Sandy, it's my understanding that your intention was to hold off on any further action until we have the newly formed Growth Fund Committee.
Well, my intention is, let's see what tomorrow brings.
Yes.
But I'm looking forward to seeing the updated ordinance suggestions.
Mayor Buczynski?
Well, I think if we've learned anything up here in the last 20 minutes is Brett really does want to keep the JDA chair and the Growth Fund chair. So we will note your hunger for that position, but Yeah, I
It
guess
pays so well that I'd hate to give it up.
Well,
yeah.
as we all came in today, we noticed that there were some protesters out there, and that's, I told a few of them, that's why we get paid the big bucks, so, yeah.
The joke here is that there is no pay for the JDA, but yeah, okay,
Exactly.
good.
So I guess we would look at further, and if that's the route, maybe it does make sense just to clean up that ordinance and right in there, set what the growth fund is, what the leadership is there, and then if that's what we're looking at, then to look at an ordinance change that has separate people being both, and then also some language that would say the mayor cannot be the JDA president as well. I guess it'd be those changes.
The way I'm understanding my directive is growth fund is 7 members, 4 of which will be appointed by the EDC. I will also include language that the growth fund chairperson and the JDA chairperson are separate for first reading.
Very good.
Because that would be a first reading of that proposed, and in between the first reading and the second reading, it can be modified if that's the wishes of the city council.
That was not the motion that was made. The motion that was made was simply to expand the growth fund committee by 2 members.
And that's why I was asking to make sure I understand what my directions were.
I think it's pretty clear that's the motion that was voted on. And at this point, we've all discovered there actually is no growth fund committee chair as current ordinance exists. So the idea that there's a conflict between the same person being chair of both is a problem that doesn't exist currently. Yes, Mayor Buczynski.
Well, I think Keith has to we have to take back the recommendation to put the growth fund chair on the EDC then, because if there isn't one, they couldn't be a permanent member of the EDC as well. So we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but let's just get through and we'll maybe talk more about it later.
Do we need a motion between now and next city council meeting then to begin the process? No.
No, we do not. I will take the directive that will change the growth fund to a 7-person, 4 of which will be appointed by the EDC, and we'll let the rest of it, depending on what the city council does after that first reading as to what they want to do with the balance of the ordinance.
Yeah, we could discuss it at city council then if we wanted to add that to the ordinance, so.
Mr. Vian.
And procedurally, that'll come back to a committee of the whole meeting, and then it'll go to council for a first reading, and then 2 weeks later for a second reading, so we'll have plenty of time to have discussion of the details.
Correct.
And Vice President Mock? Nothing? Anything further on this? Otherwise, looking for a motion to adjourn. Have a motion to adjourn from Mr. Sandy, second from Mr. Kafami. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks.
Butler? Here. Weber?
Here.
Mock? Here. Kavami?
Here.
Sandy?
Here.
Veen? Here. All present, we have a quorum.
All right, 1.2, Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, 1.3, mayor's announcements. Well, we'll start with leaf pickup. We're going to be coming around for another week, so anybody that's still got leaves out there, you got one more chance to get them out. Leroy did send the numbers. They picked up 807 tons of leaves so far, so I want to give a big shout out to the Public Works team for their effort on that. Amid COVID and managing their work staff, they've done a great job. I had a great chance to get to know two of the county's based consultants last week. We had a productive time. General Bill Rue and General Finley were in town for a couple weeks. We went for a couple weeks, so for a couple days, we took a trip out to the Air Force Base in Grand Sky, and definitely was really productive, and look forward to more base retention efforts with them. The virtual UAS summit that was supposed to be live at the Alaris Center ended up being virtual. I want to thank Armacost and the Lieutenant Governor, Tom Sawyer, and a lot of others for their speaking at that. Certainly showcased our cutting edge technology in drones and UAS in Grand Forks. It would have been nice to have that one in person, but it's the nature of the times. We're working together with our legislative to get our legislative priorities for the upcoming session. We'll have a draft for discussion next week at the COW. I want to thank Mr. Councilmember Veen and Councilmember Weber and our Grand Forks legislators for the work on that, and get that moved over to them. Kind of a big day tomorrow, Election Day, for those of you that have been in a bubble. There's an election tomorrow. From 7 to 7 p.m. we're going to be providing transportation, city area transfer from the Metro Transit Center to the Alaris Center every 30 minutes. So if anybody needs a ride, get on a bus anywhere, get to that Metro Center there, and they'll take you over to vote. Absentee and mail-in ballots need to be placed in the drop box at the county building by 5 p.m. tomorrow. So get there before 5 if you want your ballot counted. And from what I'm hearing, the county and the staff at the Alaris Center have done a phenomenal job, and that's really moved through well. Tomorrow will be the big day, probably 8,000 to 10,000 people moving through there, but I've got plenty of faith that they'll continue to do that well. With that, that's all for Mayor's announcements.
Yeah, Mayor Bochinsky, if I could just add one clarification. I believe the deadline for the Dropbox was today at 5. So tomorrow you have to go in person.
All right, well, the good news is that I guess you've missed it already at this point, or not the good news, the bad news. And we'll have to check with Spencer, because he wrote that note for me, so he's the one that's going to be in trouble on that. All right, so if you didn't drop it off in time, catch the bus, get down to the Alaris Center, because the ballot box there is closed, but the ballot box at the Alaris Center is open. Thank you for that clarification, so I appreciate that. And with that, we'll move on to 2, awards, presentations, appointments, and proclamations.
2.1 is the statewide interoperable radio network update.
Mayor, if you wouldn't mind hitting the lights too.
Greetings. Greetings, Mayor Bochinsky and members of the council. My name is Becky Alt, and I am your 911 PSAP director. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now, so if that doesn't work, I'm going to have Cheryl help me out here. That work? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Sure can.
Okay, thank you. I currently serve as chair of the North Dakota SIAC subcommittee, and this is a committee that works on siren initiatives. We have Fire Chief Gary Lorenz here tonight, and he serves as the vice chair of the North Dakota SIAC, which is the statewide interoperable executive committee. So this is a policy and oversight group, cross-discipline representation from across the state. So a pretty good analogy of what our roles are is the SIAC is sort of like the city council, in that they set up the policies that will be adopted. And the subcommittee is kind of like the staff, where we put together recommendations and bring forward to the SIAC. Chief Mark Nelson is also remotely attending and available should there be any other questions regarding radios or communications for our response community. So with that, the update that I want to provide you tonight is where we are in time now with the project. The Grand Forks PSAP was the first to get on board on the core system. This happened in February. In March, the next PSAP that was to come on board was Minot, and we all know what happened in March. And so that install was delayed about 6 weeks. But I'm happy to report that we're back on track. In fact, by the end of this year, we should have roughly 50% of our PSAPs on the new system and their consoles upgraded. Excuse me. Williams, Morton, and Burleigh counties and the cities of Grand Forks and Minot, the radio systems will be online by the end of this year, first part of 2021. And finally, the completion of the system, which we're targeting at June of 2024, will entail 140 tower sites, guaranteed 95% mobile coverage, 85% portable coverage across the state, and we have guaranteed system support for 25 years. So we have a robust contract, and we couldn't be more tickled to be moving forward on this system. So further information on what is happening in the Grand Forks area is you're seeing a picture of the DOT tower site, which is located north of Grand Forks. This is one of 2 towers that will be necessary for our responders to use the system in the city of Grand Forks. The equipment shelter that you see there was just set last week on Thursday. The tower equipment will be going up the week of November 9th. And should be coming online late this year or early next year. The Purpur Water Tower is the secondary location. This is going to be what's called a simulcast site, and so our more urbanized areas, of which there's 8, will each have simulcast towers placed in them, and this is to provide more robust capability within buildings to communicate with our radios. The concrete work will be done this week, and we're so grateful that the weather is cooperating. So it sounds like the end of this week the concrete will be poured. The shelter is set to be delivered the week of Thanksgiving, and the equipment is to come online late December, early January. The radio purchases, wanted to thank you for all of our public safety entities for the allocation to allow for purchasing of these radios. It's really very integral to the success of the system is to get people on and testing it. The police department radios have already been purchased and have been delivered to Stone's Mobile Radio. The fire department is looking at ordering probably yet this week. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks after you order for the equipment to arrive at this point. Hopefully, with legislative approval during this session, the next partners that will be coming on board will be our public works partners. So that will be something that we'll be pursuing in this session is the radio reimbursement process for those folks to qualify for reimbursement for radios. This is up to $1,500 per radio. So that will be important moving forward. And finally, we have Grant Peterson, and he has been hired as of September 14th as our radio systems coordinator. We're very happy to have him on board. He works for PSAP, but he is working with response entities within the county and the city. He comes to us with a background with working with trunked radio systems, worked with the Grand Forks Air Force Base trunked radio system when they set their system up about 10 years ago. So we're happy to have him on board. He's currently in training this week with Motorola remotely, and he'll begin putting those templates together for our individual agency radio programming probably next week, as early as next week. So some final thoughts, thinking about interoperability. We've been working on interoperability not only within our county and cross disciplines and our partner agencies in North Dakota, regionally and statewide, but we also have to think about how we're going to talk to our responders and folks across the river. And we're working with them to include Kitson, Marshall, Norman, and Polk counties, and it's very exciting to see how we're going to be able to work together and collaborate so well with this system. We'll also be working on training modules with the new system. This is both at a state level and locally. So I just want to report that we're on track, and we should be testing the system by the end of the year, first part of next year. And we are very excited as we move forward. I stand ready to answer any questions you may have. And as I mentioned, we have Chief Lorenz available on site as well as Chief Nelson, should you have questions.
Thank you, Ms. Alt. I know this has been a long time coming, so I'm glad we were able to make that happen in a tough year, because that takes some stress off of everybody, especially you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Weber?
Yes, Ms. Alt, thanks for the presentation. I know that yourself, Chief Nelson, and over the last few years, Chief Lorenz, have been leaders across the state on this effort. This has been a top legislative priority for the city for the last, I think, maybe the last 3 sessions or longer.
Yeah.
This helps take public safety communications into the 21st century to provide efficient, effective, professional delivery of public safety. Is there anything else that you need from us beyond continued support as a legislative priority as we prepare for the upcoming legislative session?
I would say continued support, and we very much appreciate that. We've had very solid support from you and others. And with that, there may be feedback from Chief Lorenz or Chief Nelson, but we just want to say thank you for your support, and we'll have more information as we go along. We're going to learn more as we get on the system and test it out. It's pretty exciting.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Chief came all the way to the podium. So.
Right. Well, I got to say something. So Mayor Buchenski, members of the council, on behalf of myself, Chief Nelson, I know we're very appreciative of your support through this process. I can tell you from a first responders perspective, this has been a very important item for us, both locally and legislative. It's been a long task. I've been involved with this probably for at least 8 years. Anytime you want to get the state unanimously on support, or all the different public safety entities across the state on board with one thing, it's a very difficult thing to do. This is one success story, and I think amidst the COVID pandemic, it's a good story for us to tell. And I know locally, it's a huge win. The radio system we were using, it's at the end of its life. The equipment is failing, and being able to have your support and the use of the CARES funds moving forward is a huge thank you on our part. The Prairie Dog funding was our other avenue, and we know where that's at today. So this was a nice boost for us locally for the first responders. To clarify what Becky was talking about, the pictures of the towers, the pictures of the infrastructure equipment, that was part of the state's allocation to the system. I mean, they're building 140 plus towers across the state. There's 23 PSAPs that will eventually be tied into it. And we're fortunate to be on the leading edge of this, and we're really excited about telling some positive success stories going into this session.
Mayor?
Thank you. Mr. Veen, please.
Hey, just one last comment. I know how hard you and Ms. Alt have been working on this, so I appreciate the efforts. And I think what I really want to recommend is that I think because of your efforts that you've done so far, was probably one of the factors that got us in first. And so I think we should not only acknowledge the work you've done, but because of that diligence, it probably got us here, and I think we'll reap the benefits quicker than others, and thank you much for that.
Thank you.
Mayor, since Gary's up there, so 2 years ago at the session, Gary testified, and I got a report back from Representative Sanford, who's on appropriations, and he said, your fire guy did such a great presentation. He turned the whole appropriations committee, made it understandable to everyone, and they got a unanimous vote. And that fire guy was our fire chief, Lorenz. So he not only helped Grand Forks, he helped the entire state by really bringing it home to people at the legislative level, and got a unanimous vote, and they all got it and moved forward. So I want to thank Gary and the whole team for that.
Well, thanks, Chief. I think changing minds at appropriations is a minor miracle in and of itself, so nice work. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Jeannie's got one, and then we'll move on to Mr. Haugen. He's been waiting patiently.
I do think this was a good use of the COVID, or the CARES Act dollars as well. And so I think it's good that we put it towards public service and safety, and that is a good use of those dollars coming into our community.
Absolutely. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
2.2.
Downtown transportation study.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Earl Haugen, Grand Forks, East Grand Forks Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm here tonight to present to you the results of a downtown transportation study that we are completing. This builds off of the success that you have with your downtown action plan, together with the downtown parking study that we completed for you a little while ago. However, this study does cross the river and includes the transportation of East Grand Forks. And so, as you'll find with my assistance from Mike Bittner, KLJ, who assisted on this as he presents the study finding recommendations, the opportunities that exist are somewhat solely in each city, but then there are also opportunities that need to have action jointly by both cities. And as a staff report pointed out, one of the first opportunities, it also piggybacks off of that term interoperability. For the first time, we have the complete traffic signal replacement programmed on the Minnesota side. That's been an Achilles heel to reliable transportation through Demers Avenue, through the downtown. So this is an opportunity that we have that we've never enjoyed before. But with that opportunity, if nothing else, you hear tonight, hear this term, adaptive traffic signal control. That's a smart technology to plug in and play, in my very simple terms, of ability to enhance that traffic signal replacement so that our systems are better and more coordinated and actually are really interoperable and work on the fly. With that teed up, I'll let Mike Bittner do the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Can you see my screen and hear my voice?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. So as Earl mentioned, this is a downtown transportation study that stretches across both downtowns, and really the focus of the presentation will be to talk about primarily the issues in Grand Forks. As Earl mentioned, that there will be a lot of tag team projects that go across the river, but really the goal of this project was to increase the balance. The balance of downtown is unlike any other part of the metro area. It has a diverse ecosystem of cars, parking, biking, peds, transit, trucks, taxis, and ride hailing. It's also about balancing Demers, which is a critical component to downtown, but also a critical component for moving cars throughout the entire region. Now, usually as we go through this planning process, we develop projects, and it's very difficult to find funding and programming. However, through downtown, we have 22 different projects already with funding allocated. And so this provided us with a great opportunity to be able to help guide some of the future scoping of these different projects. We had a 3-phase process, starting with identifying needs, developing and assessing improvement strategies, and formulating an implementation strategy. And this included 4 steering committee meetings and 3 public input opportunities. We had a really smart, engaged, and diverse group on our steering committee, which included downtown stakeholders, ranging from the DDA to specific business owners. We had a lot of oversight agency support from the MPO, MnDOT, NDDOT, FHWA, and then a lot of representation from the city, including the council member, engineering, planning, and city's area transit. And through their help and guidance from the public, we were able to combine that feedback along with our technical assessment to develop a prioritization strategy, which I'm going to focus really on today is really the high priority projects based on that ranking criteria. And so the number one scoring alternative from that process was in East Grand Forks, Riverwalk Center parking lot. It's really our only missing gap in the pedestrian network. Again, I'm not going to dive into the East Grand Forks projects so much, but I did want to include them in the presentation in case you were curious to see what all was included. What I really want to dive into first is the Demers Avenue adaptive signal control concept that Earl had discussed before. And so we're all aware that Demers Avenue was recently improved on the Grand Forks side, so what else can we do to improve that? We're not looking to make any major infrastructure improvements, of course. However, as we look at the corridor itself, and despite we've got a really large study area, we had 37% of all of our study area crashes, 64% of all of our injuries, and almost all of these crashes are mainline rear ends. You're driving across the bridge and it's beautiful. You look left and right, there's a long queue of cars and it surprises you if you have a rear end crash. So really what we're finding is that we have a clear marriage between safety and operations. We don't have communications to the two signals on the East Grand Forks side. And just with all the variability that occurs naturally in downtown, we have a lot of different traffic peaks, ebbs and flows that really help to contribute to challenging traffic progression through this corridor. So we used, with the help of some pretty detailed computer modeling tools, we looked at a variety of different scenarios and we tried to compare what the difference between an adaptive signal system would look like and what we operate today. Now, you probably think we've got the video cameras, we must be operating perfectly responsive today, but how it works is you actually set pretty static signal timing plans and you use that detection just to tell you when there's cars or not. An adaptive signal control, what it does is it completely adapts and adjusts to everything throughout the network, and it does require some pretty extensive algorithms, which just requires extra software and data that's not currently on the system. So we looked at a variety of different situations, just a normal growth scenario, seasonal variation like beet harvest. We simulated what happens when a crash occurs, a school event, a winter storm, and a flood event where Point Bridge is closed and Sorley was open. And what we found was really tremendous results. The majority of these scenarios found around 25% to 33% reduction in overall delays just from these variations in signal timing and adjustments. And so you can find all these benefits without having to make any major infrastructure investment. And so really the key to successfully implementing this is, teaming up with East Grand Forks, developing a maintenance agreement. Really, Grand Forks is set up very well with all the recent technology improvements they've had to be able to really buy the software and get this to work. The next improvement is a pedestrian crossing improvement in East Grand Forks on Demers Avenue. Next is 3rd Street and 4th Street curb bulb outs, and this is a great example where some of our analysis has been able to help inform ongoing studies and projects. For example, 3rd Street. Really the goal of this project was to better provide pedestrian crossings through the most critical areas of pedestrian crossing areas in downtown. This was over 1/3 of all of our pedestrian comments related to pedestrian comments were on 3rd Street. We also looked at a Kitson Avenue cycle track concept, which was first identified as part of the Downtown Action Plan. And really this concept is designed to connect existing shared use path that goes all the way along Demers Avenue to the west and then connects into the Greenway. And so this is a great opportunity to improve east-west connectivity, but will require a lot of coordination with BNSF, property owners, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineering. Another popular concept that has been brought up through past planning efforts is the idea of a pedestrian bicycle bridge. We would leverage the existing pier from the old BNSF bridge just north of Sorley Bridge. And because Sorley Bridge is not wide enough to accommodate bicyclists at a safe level based on past studies, the whole vision here is that this would be a great opportunity to not only really open up different parts of downtown for walking and biking, but also really provide safe accessibility for bikes and even make it a little bit better for pedestrians. But once again, this is a project that needs a little bit more planning and environmental analysis. It did have our highest cost at $2.6 million. Our last high priority project was on 6th Street. This was our highest crash rate location, not our highest crash frequency. And so rate just incorporates the amount of traffic. And because we have really low traffic volumes on 6th Street, because we had such high angled crashes, this really started to rise to the top of issues we wanted to resolve. And what we find is that drivers often don't see the stop signs. There's parked cars, there's trees, there's a lot of different clutter that makes it difficult. So they're driving through, we have angle crashes, we unfortunately had a pedestrian fatality headed to the high school. And so this opportunity would be to add bulb outs once again to bring that stop sign into our line of sight as kind of a low-cost improvement to really improve safety. Very quickly, our medium and low priority projects. I'm not going to dive into these in great detail. I'm going to read off the medium ones, and then I'll probably just click through the low priority, really with the whole idea being that if you are curious, you're welcome to ask any questions about it, or this information is all available on the website. So as we look at our medium priority projects, we kind of fell into that. Yes, this is a good idea, but no, we don't have to do it just this second. Was a lot of policy items, winter maintenance enforcement, ADA transition issues, lead pedestrian intervals to improve safety at signalized intersections. We did have one larger concept in this medium bucket, and this was a high quality bike facility on 4th Street. We also had bike policy changes as a way to improve that bike share potential if that goes forward in the future, and then mobility hubs as a way to promote a park once environment. And then here's our low priority. Again, if you have any questions or comments on these, I'm happy to address them, but these are likely the items that won't make it into the current programming, but are a good way to evaluate some of these ideas to see if we want to address them later. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have today, or if you have any follow-up questions later, don't hesitate to reach out to me or check out our website, dtforksmobility.com.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we have any questions? Mr. Veen?
Just one question. I know you brought up the one project that's been out there for some time, and that would be a pedestrian bicycle path using the existing or the old railroad bridge pier. Is there funding available for that type of a project? And if so, where would it be? And do you have any idea what that, in a ballpark, what that cost would be?
I think if we could get that slide, it shows the cost estimate for that.
I think it was 2.6 million.
2.6 million, yes. There are a variety of funding sources for that. They're all competitive, and so it would be a matter of what other projects they are competing. Some of them are individual state competitions, and of course there are national competitions as well. But there are a variety of programs that could provide the funding. The project would be eligible for those funding. Whether it would rise to the top in the competitive selection process would be the question.
Is there things that we could do to be ready? I mean, I don't think we have enough information to even submit at this time, do we?
No, there's probably not enough information to go after a funding source request. There are, as the slide shows, there are some social and economic, there's environmental work that could be done to further the project along. There's certainly just as we are doing with other river crossings to the south of this, there's a hydrology that could be done in this vicinity of the downtown. Those are some follow-up studies that could be done to advance the project further beyond this.
The dilemma is, where's the money going to come for even the studies, I would think.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mayor Paczynski, I think on that, the city council, this is when you don't do things all the way. So the city council did eliminate that from the, we'll call it the Greenway plan back in the early 2000s. And so it has been a consistent remark. Obviously, we have 2 pedestrian bridges. There was a 3rd in the downtown, and that was eliminated at the time. And so it's been an ongoing, every 5-year discussion. We ought to do that. And so it has continued to come up.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for the study. Thank you for all you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. Beltner, thank you.
All right. 2.6, COVID-19 update.
Thank you. I'm going to start, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Dulitz and Debbie. Obviously, we're seeing case numbers that are staying high. Any of the mitigation that we've put into effect recently is going to take 2 to 3 weeks, I think, at a minimum, they say, for that to work out. We're also hoping that just generally, citizens are making smarter choices as numbers have increased, but that, again, is going to take many weeks to be able to see the fruits of those efforts. We're going to continue focusing on increased testing access, trying to get as many as we possibly can, working with Ms. Swanson and Mr. Lee on how we can maximize the amount that we're going to be able to get back from the state and from the Mako labs. We've have a great partnership with the Alaris Center and Altru now that we're going to be able to do drive-through testing there starting on November 11th. So that'll be a great opportunity as the weather gets bad to still be able to do that everyday testing. I think we'll have some pretty good capacity there. We'll have to see that. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I think Ms. Swanson can speak to that. In my office, we've been actively engaging bar and restaurant owners on the changing guidelines. Some of this doesn't happen as fast as you'd like, but we're certainly staying engaged and working on signage and efforts there. Outside of that, the focus, hopefully pretty soon will be on the vaccine administration, how to get that out efficiently and effectively. And I know Ms. Swanson's working very hard on that as well. So it looks like Mr. Dulitz is going to start, so take it away, sir.
Mayor Boczynski and members of the council, I'm Michael Dulitz. I assist with our COVID data efforts at Grand Forks Public Health. So I'm going to do a little bit of a regular data update, try to focus on the health officer's dashboard, as well as a couple of other topics of interest related to incidents. Looking at our health officer risk score for today, unfortunately, it's not painting as good of a picture as I would like to bring to you on a weekly basis. Our new cases have gone up significantly, particularly in the past week. We keep hitting days where we're having record numbers of cases, and unfortunately, what's being reflected in our case count right now isn't including all cases that we're investigating. Currently, there's about a 5% difference because we treat antigen tests that come back positive as actual cases, whereas they aren't reported out as cases. We only report out tests that are what we call PCR positive, so the nose swab that gets sent off to the reference lab, we count those as our positives. Looking at our tests, we still are continuing to lead the state testing-wise among our peer counties. A lot of what we have seen as new testing this week, or new test numbers, are what seems to be unique tests. So we're having an increasing number of individuals seeking out testing. Unfortunately, that has put a constraint on our testing system. We do have individuals having to wait longer times to get tests. We had individuals waiting a couple days to get testing, for instance, at Altru, and that was reports that I had received as a contact tracer. The good part is we are seeing people come to the market with testing. We've seen additional entities, both with the support of Grand Forks Public Health, as well as individuals, entering into the private sector to bring additional testing capacity to the community. And we have been seeing those, the benefit of that, in that we're identifying additional cases through their efforts as well. Our percent positivity has also gone up as well. We are now consistently over that 10% positivity, which has moved us up into the red. And then another development that's happened in the past week is moving into the orange on our hospital capacity. Altru has been feeling constrained with the number of COVID cases that they're having. As of today, they reported out, I believe it was 26, but don't quote me on that, COVID positive inpatients that they have. I've been working with the state to help better clarify what's happening with what's being reported out for hospitalizations. What's being reported out for COVID hospitalizations in Grand Forks right now is what seems to be about half, or maybe a little bit more, of what is actually there from Grand Forks County at Altru. So, I don't think that, I think that discrepancy is just related to the way things, or the way that they're pulling the data, and not necessarily, there's no, ill intention by it or anything like that. And then finally, we are seeing the percent change on the graph, the percent change of cases kind of fluctuating between the orange and red. So we are still seeing consistent growth in the number of cases, which is also concerning as well. Looking at a quick snapshot, we just finished up October, so I just wanted to give you a picture of where we were at on October 1st compared to October 31st. So in the case rate, we were in the red, but we were a lot closer to orange on October 1st. So we would bump down into the orange if it got below 25 cases per 100,000. We were really close on October 1st, and now we're significantly further away from that goal. But we have also seen, like I had mentioned, that increase in testing as well. So we've been having more people either seeking out testing, either because they're symptomatic or because of the messaging that we've been doing in the community. Our ability to identify positive cases is very important. We want individuals who suspect that they are positive to be able to get easy access to cases, because that helps us identify the less acute cases. For instance, the individuals who may be asymptomatic or have very minor symptoms, which isn't a luxury that a lot of places have. And then our percent change is obviously moved in the other direction, as well as our percent positivity, as we've had a higher case count even with the increased testing. Looking at a comparison of Grand Forks County to our other peer communities, again, we've seen some almost exponentially reaching increases in the number of cases that we've had in Grand Forks County over the past month or so. And when we compare it to other communities, Grand Forks tends to have more of tends to run more in outbreaks versus other communities where we see, more sustained growth in cases. So looking at our peer counties, Cass County has moved into kind of the lowest spot where they were kind of growing hand in hand with us. They've moved to the bottom. Ward County, on the contrary, has moved to the top of the case rate, as identified on this graph. Ward County is very concerning because they've also seen a very high percent positivity. So they're probably not identifying all the cases that they're having, whereas we do have a high number of tests and still good test availability, so we can be a little bit more confident that we are identifying the cases that that are occurring in the community. Unfortunately, we are in that second place spot. We have surpassed Burley Morton in in our case rate per 100,000, and then we are significantly above the state as well. Breaking that down, looking at age groups, we are seeing sustained increase, particularly still in that 20 to 29 and 30 to 59 age group. The spot that does concern me the most, though, is the increases that we're seeing both in the 60-plus age group and the 0 to 19 age group. The mayor has mentioned that those are groups of particular concern. We want to keep the schools open. We want to keep cases out of long-term care facilities, obviously, as well, given the high mortality. I did want to look a little bit at the 60-plus age group and break that down a little bit more based on the 10-year increments to get an idea on where the spread is happening in that group. So when we look at the 60 to 69 age group, the 60 to 69 age group has been kind of matching the community rate pretty hand in hand lately. The 70-plus age group, again, has been, roughly on par with the community. I think we see, things are a little bit lower because there's, maybe a little bit different distribution on if individuals are in long-term care settings versus at-home settings in that 70-year-old age group. And then finally, looking at the 80-plus age group, what we had seen before was traditionally a number of outbreaks, and we would tie that, likely back to like a long-term care setting or something like that, where it's an isolated outbreak in the community that we can, address. What we're seeing right now is the case rate is kind of matching what we're seeing in the community, which obviously is a sign for concern that either, individuals over the age of 80 in the community are getting it, despite efforts to protect themselves, or that we're seeing spread within nursing homes. Both scenarios are not, not fortunate because the mortality rate is so high in the 80-plus age group, upwards of 15%. I just wanted to look a little bit at our incidence as well. So one thing that they talk about in epidemiology is like a doubling number, or a doubling time. So I did mark out on this chart the doublings of cases that we've seen in recent memory. So looking back to right around mid-April to now. So we did just experience another doubling between September and October. Obviously that, this is a big doubling moving from, 2,000 to 4,000 cases. And then I did want to, get a little bit better idea on where we were at. We're 217 days now into COVID in Grand Forks County. So I wanted to see what we were looking at with, an average doubling time. So this is an estimated case doubling time using some information or using a formula that I did find in a journal. So this takes an estimated time that it would take to double based off of the the case situation in the past 2 weeks. So it looks back 2 weeks to generate a case doubling time. So the peaks are high amounts of time. So if we were to look at the rate that cases are growing at that particular point in time, if it's high, that indicates that we're doing really well. The case rates are really low. As the number decreases, the risk increases as the doubling time decreases. So for today, we're at 23 was our case doubling time. Looking at that doubling time of 23 days, that would give us our next doubling if we stayed at this rate. And this is a little bit of a this is a lot of estimations. But if we did stay at this rate, we would double this month and double again next month and then double again in January. So obviously that would be a potential concern for the community as we looked at the number of cases that we would be increasing. And these doubling times are cumulative, so it's the time from 9,000 to 19,000 cumulative incidents in the community, the time from 19,000 to 38,000. There is still a lot of variables to this, but it is an idea of looking at where we are at right now, and if our case rates stayed the course, how long it would take for us to double. Also putting this into perspective, if we looked at it based off of, case fatality rate, fortunately in Grand Forks County, it appears that our case fatality rate is much lower than what we've been seeing, both based off of, what other places have seen reported out in journals, as well as the state. Based off of my estimation, we were at about 0.46% case fatality rate. If we kind of followed with the number of cases we'd have 23 additional deaths this month, 67 additional deaths between now and December 18th, and 154 additional deaths between now and January 10th, if we kind of followed this same trajectory. Again, there's a lot of variables at play here, but I'm just proposing this as an idea of what could happen if we kind of stay the course as we're at right now. Looking at our percent positivity, that is one area that we are obviously concerned for the community. We have gone over 10% as a community. Comparing to the peer counties, we are kind of following with both Cass and Burley Morton. Ward County, again, has had a very hard time. I don't know why, but they have had a very hard time with, getting a high number of individuals tested. They have their individuals that they are frequently testing, like we do in long-term care facilities and hospital employees. So you'd expect to see more tests being reported out, but what they're seeing is a case count similar to ours, or higher than ours, yet testing significantly lower. And then we are following along with par on what the state is at right now. I did want to break it down a little bit, looking at, at our, roughly 12% positivity, comparing that to what's positivity based off of unique tests versus what's positivity based off of serial tests. Serial tests being individuals who have been previously tested, unique tests being individuals that have never been tested before, that when they tested positive, that was the first time they had gotten tested. So when we look at a 7-day percent positivity, we are above 25% in individuals getting unique tested. That may be also factoring in why our testing numbers are so high right now, as we have a lot of individuals who have otherwise not been part of any of our testing events going out to get tested. And then when we look at our serial testing rates, those have, those aren't growing at at similar rates, but we have heard concerns expressed by like Valley Senior Living in that they test their employees very frequently. I don't quote me on this, but I believe they test their residents twice per week and their employees once per week, and they're seeing positivity rates in the 2.9% realm, which is the highest that they have seen them as well, in a group that is being frequently tested. Again, not to belabor the point, but again, we have been seeing those increases in the unique tests, and we have also been seeing increases in serial tests as well. And that, that is likely based on nursing homes having to test individuals a certain number of times per week based off of the case rates in the community. And then finally, looking at our hospitalization rates, as I had mentioned earlier, I am working on the state on clearing up what the discrepancy is between what Ultra is reporting to us for hospitalizations and what we're seeing on the list. I'm working with our regional epidemiologist to try and get that sorted out, because that does have kind of a big bearing on where we're at compared to our peers on our hospitalization rates. Again, we're looking at about double of where we're at right now. And then finally, before I turn it over to Debbie, I did want to just kind of set the stage for her remarks, looking at contact tracing capacity. So over the past few months, obviously the increase in cases has put a big burden on our contact tracing abilities. We have done a fairly good job at rising to the occasion, particularly in October, but that also required us to change the way that we were doing contact tracing as well. Another asset that we do have, I view it as a huge asset to our community, is the UND contact tracing team, their campus-wide contact tracing team, and they have ramped up capacity, I think, very quickly, and has helped relieve a lot of the stress on our system as well. The state has also heard about that, and now they want that expertise to be used throughout the state to help with contact tracing at other campuses, which may kind of dilute out the amount of help that we get from the UND contact tracing team on campus. And then we also have been getting a lot of help from statewide assets as well, such as the UND MPH program, NDSU MPH program, and then statewide contact tracers. With that, that's a good segue for Debbie to take over and talk a little bit more about contact tracing.
Mayor Bochenski, members of the City Council, I'm Debbie Swanson, Director of Grand Forks Public Health Department. I think Michael did a really great job of giving you all the data and then leading in with our situation with contact tracing right now. And I know we've been talking about this a lot and you had a presentation, but I just want to remind you that this has been a significant effort that Grand Forks Public Health has taken on that's unique across the state, and that we've put a lot of effort into it. And we've really developed strong partnerships that have made it really worthwhile to try to mitigate the spread in our community. But it is one leg of the stool. Testing has been great in Grand Forks, and we thank our partners for helping us make that happen too. Contact tracing is another leg in the stool, as well as the isolation and quarantine that follows it. So our charge to the community now is to answer the phone when the contact tracer calls you, to follow their instructions, to isolate if you are identified as a positive contact, and to quarantine if you have been a close contact. Our reason for doing that work is because we don't have a vaccine. We do have good treatments now, and we have been able to reduce our death rates. But all of these elements together are really, really important to containing the spread. I know you've heard me say it before, but I have to say it again. It is really our best work that we can do. It's time-honored in public health, and really the only way we'll get beyond the pandemic and be an economically viable community as well as a public health viable community as well. I wanted to point out a couple of other things, and that is among people who have recently been tested positive, we have a pretty high percentage of them that report symptoms during the time that we contact trace with them, that we're investigating their case. So while there is asymptomatic spread, there are a lot of people out there with symptoms and they are ill. We also don't know the long-term consequences of the disease. People do recover, but sometimes there can be long-lasting health impacts, and that has an impact on our health system, and it has an impact on our economy as well when people are utilizing health care for long-term consequences. We're still learning a lot about the disease. And then lastly, I wanted to make a few remarks about vaccines, because you're starting to hear more about vaccines, and you're hearing about Operation Warp Speed, which sounds kind of scary, but it's actually just describing how the industry has really come together to try to produce safe and effective vaccines for SARS-CoV-2. Right now, there are approximately 9 vaccines in development in the U.S. and many more worldwide, and some of them have advanced to the late-stage clinical trials, and those include Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson. You may have heard about some of them that paused their trials for a period of time until they explored some specific situations that occurred, but they have resumed their trials. And to the best of my knowledge, all of them have filled all of their phase 3 clinical trials, and the FDA will require that there's a good 2 months of data before the vaccines will be released for widespread use. We've been told that we should have our plans in place on November 15th for how we will administer it in our communities. So we are beginning to work with our community partners. It doesn't necessarily mean that vaccine will be here on November 15th, but we should have our plans in place so that when it is here, we know how we will administer it. The provider enrollment is available through the North Dakota Department of Health, and we know we have at least 400 providers across the state of North Dakota that have enrolled in it. And we have a list of those in Grand Forks County. And then we will be following up on making sure that all those that are in priority groups have a plan. Are they going to expect the health department to administer it or store it? Or are they going to require a pharmacy to give it for them, or will they be able to do it themselves? So that's all information we're gathering right now as we meet with our community partners. I did also want to mention that the priority groups will be set, and they will be, they may change or they may be further prioritized within the priority groups, but right now it appears that healthcare workers will be top of the list along with long-term care healthcare workers, their staff, and their residents, and then critical infrastructure. I don't know exactly what that definition will be like, but most likely it'll be our public safety, public service type workers so that we can maintain our critical infrastructure to keep all of our residents safe should the disease become significantly worse in our community. And then also persons at risk from COVID complications. So those individuals that have underlying health conditions or are elderly would also be prioritized as well. So you can see we have a lot of work ahead of us. As a health department, we're preparing for this. We have great relationships with our community providers. We also have a lot of vaccine providers in our community, which has been invaluable to us as a health department, as we depend on them now for routine vaccinations while we fight COVID, and we are depending on them for flu shots as well. Well, we did vaccinate our city and county employees as a sort of a dry run for how we would administer COVID vaccine. We encourage everyone to get flu shots. It will help us during this difficult season that is going to present itself in the weeks and months ahead, as influenza will likely appear in our community. And I stand before you if you have any questions or anything that you would like further clarification on. Please do know that vaccine information is a constantly changing environment, and so we may have new information weekly from our state health department.
Thank you. I know there's uncertainty, but it definitely is exciting to hear that we could be on the cusp of getting that. I guess I just have one question. Is there any policy recommendations that you would have for this body going forward?
Most of our policy recommendations, Mayor Bochensky and members of the council, really address prevention. So as it relates to size of events, capacity in indoor settings, the use of face coverings, all of those kinds of things go a long ways to preventing the disease so that we can get us to the point of having vaccination and a widely protected population. One thing you may want to consider is looking at our dashboard and assigning some of those policy recommendations that are similar to the North Dakota Smart Restart and aligning those with the dashboard with some cut points and things that would be decision-making points for you. And we would be happy to assist in that effort.
Questions or comments? Mr. Weigel?
Yes, I understand that...
Mr. Weigel, sorry, we'll get to you next, sir.
No worries. Ms. Swanson, I'm reading the article that just came out in the Herald today, and I had an opportunity to take a quick look. But you mentioned that you're quoted saying, "We need more stringent policies, to be honest. I think there's a lot of people that have COVID fatigue because it hasn't impacted themselves. They want to go about living their lives without restrictions, but the sad part is that it affects other people just like other laws that we have." Can you tell me what some of those other laws are?
Sure. Mr. Weigel, I'd be happy to tell you. Some examples from public health and public safety might be things like our alcohol laws, drinking and driving laws, speed laws, seatbelt laws, immunizations for children in schools. Those are all things that protect other people, and we have a long history of working to ensure that our public is safe from some of the threats that might occur that would be very similar to this.
And the other thing, I guess, that in a way, I read this article as you're not happy with the policy decisions that are being made currently. And that's how I read this. My question is I don't recall ever getting emails saying, this is what we should be doing, we need to have this. But then I come back and I read it in the Grand Forks Herald, which is kind of disheartening to me because we've implemented a face mask policy or a mandate, however you want to call it, but yet you read this and it seems like it's counterintuitive of trying to come forward and make suggestions, and I haven't heard any of those things, I guess, from public health or anybody else.
Mayor Bochensky, members of the council, Mr. Weigel, I think we have had a lot of those conversations in informal meetings, such as the community partners meetings. We've brought issues forward at institutional partners meetings, and we have on a couple of occasions recommended that we should align more of our actions with the North Dakota Smart Restart. We've been asked many times if they're enforceable, and we've had to reiterate that they're guidelines. So making them guidelines that are enforceable would be one way that we could compel behavior in a direction that will protect the community. And those are things that we've done in the past. Smoke-free laws are a really good example of that. And we'd be happy, if the council is prepared to do that, we would certainly be happy to engage with you and make some of those recommendations.
I guess I would just say that I wish those recommendations would have come forward first before reading the article in the Grand Forks Herald saying that policymakers aren't doing anything. That's my only concern. If you have concerns, please come to us and not to the Grand Forks Herald to voice those concerns first.
Other questions, comments? Mr. Weber?
Quick comment and then a question. I noted currently we have relatively low death rates compared to other places in the country. Nonetheless, with the current projections, we could be looking at as many as 150 or up to over 400 deaths in our community from COVID by Valentine's Day. That's a sobering statistic. And now the state, we are in excess of 500 deaths. That's gone up dramatically just in the last couple of weeks. One thing that I've heard a lot about is herd immunity, and one of the foundations of that would be that once someone has the disease, they are then immune from the disease. Can you tell us what we know currently about post-infection immunity?
Mayor
If anything.
Bochensky, members of the council, Mr. Weber, herd immunity is something that is not always easy to explain, but you can have natural herd immunity where a large percentage of the population has been infected with a disease and thus they are immune. For a highly contagious disease like measles, you need a herd immunity of about 95%. So that it doesn't continue to spread among the population. And so our measles, mumps, rubella vaccines have a very high effectiveness, and we require a very large percentage of the population to receive that vaccine in order to protect them. With SARS-CoV, I've heard projections around 60 to 70% of the population would need to be protected because of that R-naught factor and how many people are infected as a result of being exposed to one person. So we would need 60 to 70% of the population to either have natural immunity or be vaccinated. To expect the population to get it naturally would be a very high toll of disease and death. It would require that we'd probably, as a U.S., we'd probably have over 1.2 million deaths as a result of that, and we're currently at 230,000. There's really big dangers with natural immunity because even though people may not die, the death rates may not be very high, a lot of people will get sick. And that is a huge healthcare resource as well. And I'd be happy to share with you some resources that I have shared with the mayor on herd immunity. I could send those out to you first thing tomorrow morning so you can read up on that a little bit.
Let me ask that in a slightly different way. If I'm infected with COVID, how long am I then permanently immune from being reinfected?
Mr. Weber, we don't really know the answer to that. We're still learning about it through serology testing. What we're finding is that people do have some immunity, we just don't know how long it lasts.
Thank you.
Has there ever been an infectious disease like this that's been eradicated without herd immunity, whether it's natural or artificial?
I'm not aware of anything. Certainly we know of other diseases that are plague-like, so to speak, that have had very, very high death tolls as they did move through a population. Things like the Spanish flu had a pretty high mortality, much higher than what we're seeing right now, but we also have a different healthcare system to deal with it. The plagues in medieval times, circulated the globe for years and years and years without any real significant herd immunity until they eventually burned out.
And then is the artificial immunity expected to be last longer than natural immunity would?
Mayor Bochensky, we don't really know the answer to that either. That's something that we'll find out through all the vaccine trials. We know that vaccines are studied for a long period of time after they're utilized. Some of them become a routine part of vaccine, and in fact, H1N1 flu has been a part of our influenza vaccine for many years, even though that circulated in 2009. So it's hard to say whether or not this will become a routine vaccine. And how long it might protect people is something that'll be studied for a long time, I'm sure. The fact that our country has been able to mount this effort in such a short period of time has really been astounding. And I think it's credit to the scientists and the companies that have taken the risks to develop it.
Council President Sandy.
Yes, Ms. Swanson, thanks for coming tonight, and Mr. Dulitz as well. And as I like to do, I really appreciate, I want to tell you both, I appreciate all the hard work that our folks at Public Health, the contact tracers, the people at UND, the Masters of Public Health students, everybody's working very hard, and we know it, and we know it's a stressful time. I'm a little bit curious about, I think you, Ms. Swanson, mentioned that we have better treatments now than we've had in the past. So with the better treatments, have the mortality rates been going down? Like over time, the mortality rates, the percentage of people that are getting it that are dying is actually going down, right?
That's correct, yes.
Right, so it's more like, just as the statistician that I am, it's more likely than not that we're going to be on the lower end of deaths in our community over time, and even possibly fewer than the 150 that are predicted but that's purely speculation, just like the numbers that were provided in the report. They were provided for food for thought, not that they are wrong nor right, that they are possibilities that could happen. I am also curious, for Mr. Dulitz, the population size of the serial tests, you were showing that the serial testing, the positivity cases were increasing what appeared to be relatively dramatically. Do you know what is the sample size of the serial testing? And why are we testing people over and over again that have already tested positive?
President Sandy, the state does have a testing strategy. It's called the VP3 strategy. So, vulnerable population protection strategy. And so as part of that strategy, their goal is to make sure that, even if there's high community rates, that they can, take reasonable steps to protect long-term care settings and other vulnerable individuals as well from COVID. And so as part of that strategy, they did kind of prescribe, as well as the CMS kind of prescribed for, long-term care settings, a certain strategy of tests to complete for individuals who are at high risk. So that makes up a large proportion of the individuals who are being serial tested. There's also a lot of serial testing just because we've also been a community that has had good availability of testing for individuals who have had a concern for any reason. So, as time has gone on, individuals have had good availability for tests. And so we have a lot of people who have been tested multiple times.
Sure. So do you have any idea of the population size of the serial testing?
I don't have a good number off the top of my head.
Okay, but it's more than 5. It's probably a relatively significant number if it's being done in the nursing homes, right?
Correct. And, all true and, basic care, everything, yeah.
Right. And so each time those people are testing positive, does it register as a new positive case?
Not necessarily. So the only time it would register as a new positive case would be if more than 90 days has elapsed between when they were first tested and that follow-up positive. The idea being that individuals can have, like dead RNA in their, in their nose or airway from their COVID infection up to 3 months afterwards. And so if they test positive again, there's probably a reasonable expectation that they, could actually be positive again.
Sure. But just for the nursing home folks, so my wife tested positive. My twins and I all tested negative, but tested positive for antibodies. None of us showed any signs. I would guess, though, that it's possible my wife could go and get tested again and she'd be positive again. Would she be another positive case?
She would not be another positive case unless 90 days has elapsed.
Unless 90 days has elapsed. I question why the state recommends testing, because if the concept is after you test positive, you quarantine or you isolate for 10 days, and then you're good to go, why would the state recommend continuing to test the people that they know tested positive?
I'm not certain of what the actual policy is within long-term care settings, for instance, on people who have previously tested positive. They may not test them for X period of time. I just don't have that specific answer for you, but I can get it.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon.
It said 217 days was days ago was the first infection in Grand Forks, is that right?
Yeah, the 29th of March.
Okay. Have we had anyone test positive twice in Grand Forks during those 217 days?
We have had individuals who have had to re-isolate after, because more than 90 days has passed and they did test positive again.
And do we know if that was a reinfection or if they still had? It's hard to say, probably.
Yeah, it's hard to say in those circumstances. I just don't recall off the top of my head, but I do know for a fact that we have had individuals having to re-isolate because they've tested positive more than 90 days after.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you. You got a bit of a grilling tonight, so we appreciate you coming in. Moving on to 3 public hearings and second reading of ordinances. We have none, so we'll move on to 4 action items. I think we can pull 4.1. Is there any other ones that anybody wanted to pull? Otherwise, we can move forward on the consent agenda and get through quite a bit of this. Anything else you had, Mr. Veen or Mr. Sandy?
I'll move approval.
Well, if nobody wants one pulled, let me list them off first before we get a motion here. So that would be 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, 4.10, 4.11, and 4.12. We have a motion for approval from Mr. Weigel and a second from Vice President Mock. Any other comments? No, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Those motions carry. 4.1.
City Council consideration of mayor's veto of ordinance 4776.
So I think I got this clarified with Mr. Gosted. Basically, this would require a 5-2 vote to override. So the motion would be a motion to override the veto and adopt ordinance number 4776. Any questions or comments? I mean, I think we've talked at length about this one. If there's anything anybody wants to say to change anybody's mind, otherwise, I guess it's a decision if you wanted to make that motion or to move on. We have a motion? No. All right. We will move on then to 5 informational items. 5.1.
5.1 is the statement of changes in cash balance as of September 30th.
All right, thank you. Moving on to 6, citizen comments. Do we have any citizen comments for tonight? Again, we'll do the 3 minutes, and I've got Jeannie gave me her 30-second warning track sign. So step forward if we've got Mr. Waterman, please.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I'm here to talk about masks. I'll be honest, the 3-minute rule seems to be a violation of my First Amendment rights to petition the government for a redress of grievances without any kind of abridgment, because 3 minutes is certainly an abridged amount of time for me to talk about an issue as important and weighty as this. You know that I'm disappointed because I sent all of you an email talking about your decision from last Monday. And one of the most disappointing things to me is that I've provided all of you scientific information that demonstrates, I think, quite effectively that cloth masks don't work to prevent the spread of COVID-19. From an even pseudo-scientific perspective, the idea that a person can go out and buy some cloth material and fashion it into some type of device that will hang on your nose and mouth, and then that will prevent the spread of a virus to other people, is on its very face completely absurd. I'm shocked at the number of people who have just bought into that notion that any random piece of material covering the nose and mouth will stop a virus. There's no kind of regulation or specification as to how it must fit, what kinds of gaps are allowed or not allowed, the weave of the material, It's just as long as it's there, it's somehow going to stop the spread of this virus. It's absurd. It seems to me more like a magical amulet that you wear, and as long as it's covering your nose and mouth, it somehow will prevent the evil demon of COVID from going out from you to somebody else. The scientific studies have been done and done and done. COVID-19 is not the Spanish flu. It is not the Black Plague. It is a moderately virulent virus that affects a very small minority of the population. Debbie Swanson herself said we have effective treatments for it. And yet we're working on a vaccine to do what? To vaccinate who? The vaccines are inherently dangerous. The Supreme Court has already stated that. The abridgment of people's rights to live freely and to make decisions for themselves about their health, I think, is a very fundamental right that all Americans have. This is not Nazi Germany. It is not North Korea. It's not communist China. This is the United States of America. This virus, left on its own, will go away. On the issue of natural, Mr. Mayor, the issue of natural natural immunity versus artificial immunity coming from a shot, I would invite all of you to find any disease where natural immunity lasts a shorter period of time than artificial immunity caused by a vaccination. It doesn't happen. Natural immunity is usually a lifetime event, whereas vaccination immunity is maybe 4 or 5 years at the most, which is why we have booster shots. You've all heard of them. You don't have to readmit yourself, expose yourself if you've already gotten natural immunity. There's too much to cover. I implore all of you to look at the material. Don't look at the materials that I've sent. Find your own, but get the truth about this disease. This idea of mandating people to put a piece of magic cloth on their face, a one-way cloth. It goes in, but it won't come out. Again, absurd. Tomorrow, I'm going to be voting for President Trump for re-election. I think everybody should vote for President Trump for re-election. I think he's been a great president. But if this council was to make a decision that everyone in Grand Forks should wear one of these hats, I would be here opposing that as strongly as I'm opposing this idea of a mask mandate. This is America, and we have to be free to make decisions for ourselves. Political decisions, health decisions, all the decisions that make America great, because we get to make them as individuals without being infringed upon by any government body. So I'm here to ask you tonight to rescind completely the mask mandate. And don't ever even consider such a thing like that again. Get the science, get the truth, get the facts. But don't be telling people what they have to do, what they have to wear.
Thank you,
because
Mr.
that's not
Royer.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other citizen comments? Second call, third call. All right, thank you. Citizen comments are closed. 7, approval of minutes and bills.
7.1 is the vendor list and engineer's estimate as presented.
We have a motion to approve. Mr. Sandy motions, Mr. Kamami seconds. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. 7.2.
In 7.2, there's actually no minutes for approval tonight.
All right, 8, city administrator comments. Looks like you got 2 minutes on here, Todd, according to the sheet.
It'll be less than that. We did receive word, and it was reported in the newspaper, that we are going to get additional CARES funding, another allocation. We were concerned about that, and so you'll expect before the end of the year that we will bring a proposed allocation for those additional funds, along with maybe some of our partners, including Altru and some others, kind of fulfilling some of our commitments. And then remember, we had the CDBG portion, that almost 300,000, so we'll bring those in together. And so we would anticipate bringing those probably in late November, early December, so we can get those allocated for 2021. So that's good news on keeping things going into the new year. So thank you, Mayor and City Council, for all your patience and time and good decisions. We appreciate that. And I just say for the record, the Mayor Wojciechowski is very open to allowing people to state what they think their policy position should be, and that's why you see on any given Monday evening, unfettered people provide their advice to you as City Council members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Moving on to 9, Mayor and Council member comments. Mr. Weigel, any comments?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Dockler, you still with us?
I am still with you. It's been a long one tonight, but we're kind of used to it by now, so I'll just be brief. I just want to thank Debbie Swanson and her team, Michael Dulitz in the room there. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing throughout these few months. I know that when the Herald approaches me, or any reporter for that matter, it's not necessarily because I've reached out to them. Oftentimes, I'm not looking to talk to them about any of this. In fact, they're looking to report the news and what's going on, and I give them my opinion or what I understand to the best of my ability. And so I think that it is important to understand that they are doing the work that they can, and they are trying to support us in making the best decisions to serve our community moving forward. And so I just wanted to make that very clear, that I am appreciative of the work that department has been doing on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, Ms. Dockler. Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I never want to dissuade anyone from exercising their right to freedom of speech or to participate in the democratic political process. Indeed, I believe that Mr. Waterman and his colleagues truly believe everything that they're saying, and they have no intention of espousing anything that would cause harm to anyone. However, I've been troubled by the ongoing insinuation that COVID and the use of masks is somehow some sort of legitimate disagreement between scientific authorities, or that the anti-maskers, if I can use that shorthand, somehow have true science on their side, or that they represent half of the community. I don't believe any of that is true. The reality is that a very limited number of vociferous opponents are creating the illusion of legitimate scientific disagreement. In comparison to the fewer than 10 people who spoke against mask wearing last week, I have received dozens, I believe we all have, dozens of supporters for the mask resolution. But this is not a popularity contest. We need to look at actual scientific studies. First, the essay that we were handed last week, please note that had no publication date. This was not in a legitimate scientific journal in any way. This did not go through a peer-reviewed process. These things would be deemed in academia as pseudoscience. At least some of the individuals who have spoken recently during council meetings are self-declared, and this would include Mr. Waterman, self-declared adherents of what is known as the Great Barrington Declaration. The Great Barrington Declaration is an effort funded by the Koch brothers and is championed by a single professor from Oxford, who happens to be a zoologist, a single professor from Harvard, who's a champion of Sweden's disastrous experiment, and a single professor at Stanford, who focuses on the economics of healthcare. The overwhelming majority of scientists from all three institutions argue against the Great Barrington Declaration. And to be clear here, the GBD argues against mask wearing, argues for widespread exposure to COVID, and the false promise of herd immunity. They claim 175,000 signatures and support worldwide, though on October 9th it was reported that some of the alleged signers included Mr. Bananarama, Dr. Johnny Fartpants, Dr. Peterson Fake Name, and Professor Nadif Akinklu. Referring to the Great Barrington Declaration, the American Public Health Association noted that it is not a strategy, it is a political statement. It ignores sound public health expertise. It preys on a frustrated populace. It preys on a frustrated populace. Instead of selling false hope that will predictably backfire, we must focus on how to manage this pandemic in a safe, responsible, and equitable way. Very quickly, 3 studies, the Institute for Policy and Social Research at the University of Kansas found that counties that require masks saw a decrease in their 7-day rolling average of daily cases per 100,000 population, starting 14 days after the mandate was issued. Counties without mask mandates have seen the 7-day rolling average of daily cases steadily increase, eventually resulting in higher case rates than compared to the counties with mask mandates. Researchers from Vanderbilt University Medical Center and Vanderbilt University School of Medicine found that areas of Tennessee where people are not required to wear masks in public are seeing sharper increases of patients in the hospital in recent weeks due to COVID. Finally, kinesiology studies are showing that while mask wearing does result in greater rates of self-reporting of impaired breathing sensation, so people saying that they're not able to breathe as well, the same kinesiology studies demonstrate no impairment of ability to actually exercise or any indications of impaired blood oxygenation. These studies have been conducted using surgical, cloth, and N95 masks. I hope that City Council leadership will do all we can to encourage mask wearing, social distancing, and limits on gathering. The figures that we heard this evening for projected death rates are not idle speculation. Neither are they inevitabilities. We as a community get to decide how we're going to respond to this threat, and I hope that we'll all come together. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Kwame.
Thank you, Councilman Weber. That was very nice. Appreciate that. I just wanted to say, as we're tasked with making local decisions, I've had a lot of people reach out to me. I would just be curious if there's any family practitioners or doctors practicing in Grand Forks County that I'd welcome them to please reach out to me and just let me know how you feel. If you think we should not wear masks or should wear masks. I'd love to hear from local doctors. So as I can put that out, I'd like to know how they feel. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Veen.
Yeah, I'd just like to reach out and say thank you to Anna Roseberg and the staff at the Alaris Center who are overseeing the election process and trying to make sure that that runs smoothly and safely. I've talked to them and things are going well. Tomorrow, of course, will be a big day, but they feel like they're up for it, and I think it's helped make this election process go smooth. So thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Mock.
Thank you. I was going to mention that as well, and I did participate in early vote, and it felt safe. There were many, many workers there. It was, well, I came at the end, so it was very quick for me, but I think it would be very easy for them to get people through very quickly. So again, voting tomorrow is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the Alaris Center, and today was the final day for the drop box, so that would be the opportunity. City buses are free tomorrow as well for citizens who wish to go vote. And I think we just all have to keep in mind that staff is working as hard as they can. Thank you again to Public Health and all of the efforts that you're putting forward. I know that these are very stressful, time-consuming days for you. And all the other staff that are keeping our city services going, you know, we've got everything going. We're going to continue doing our best, and I think we just have to keep in mind that what unites us is stronger than what divides us.
Thank you. President Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going back to congratulations to Cirrus Aircraft. I think it's an excellent show of faith in our community. It's been a very long-term process. There's been discussion, I've had discussions with Mr. King about their option for years, and not that long ago, there was a time when I didn't think that they were actually going to pull the trigger on that. So I'm very happy with them. I'm also very happy that they purchased the lot next to their facility. I am a firm believer that the recommendation that came out of the growth fund made sense to sell that property at $1.50 a square foot. I do believe, however, at some point the value of that property should go up, and so although we have sold property at that price in the past, I think we should evaluate that for 2021, because perhaps it should be, I don't know, $10 more a square foot or something, just a random idea. I am a little surprised that Mr. Waterman isn't wearing a mask in City Hall. I don't know what our process is. I think we should have a general discussion about what are we going to do when people aren't following our mask requirement here in City Hall. I'm not really worried about it right now, because I don't think any of us need any more controversy tonight, but I do think that if we're going to have a requirement in our facility, we should actually be asking people to follow it. Speaking of our mask mandate, I do appreciate all the discussion a week ago today at the Committee of the Whole related to the resolution that Ms. Dockler provided. I of course, wasn't here in person, but was on Zoom, which is a challenge all in itself, which makes me want to move all council meetings on Zoom so that we're all on the same playing field. But more importantly, I was under the understanding, based upon history of meetings that I've been going to for 10 years, that any discussion or any motion made at a Committee of the Whole meeting would ultimately show up at a city council meeting. And I had the anticipation and the expectation that the resolution would come back for a second reading. I have no problem that it didn't. I'm really not concerned about it tonight. I don't want to talk about it again. I am a little surprised, though, that the resolution as it was stated was amended, and then the amended resolution didn't see itself back in front of this body for further discussion and voting, because what ultimately was signed by the mayor, which I believe was 100% what we had discussed. And so I believe the city attorney did a great job amending it, and I appreciate the fact that the mayor signed it. I would just expect that we would get another bite at the apple when the resolution was changed by the city attorney. So I know I asked these questions on Monday night and Tuesday of the mayor and the city attorney, because I was very irritated to read in the paper that the resolution would go in effect the next day because it wasn't mentioned at the Monday night meeting. I believe that if that isn't city policy, which I believe it's not, because our city attorney had told me so, I believe it should be city policy, or the city council should have the discussion and decide that no, we're okay with anything, for example, any resolution that comes through city council or Committee of the Whole. If we pass a resolution, it can go into effect immediately. I'm not really interested in having a long debate tonight about it, but I think we should have that discussion. It should probably go on a future Committee of the Whole meeting agenda for discussion so that we can discuss whether we want resolutions, for example, to become in effect after one vote, or if they should see two votes. So, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate it. Looking forward to more 2.5-hour meetings for the rest of the year. Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry, did you suggest that we should not have meetings in chambers for the next little while?
I said I wanted to suggest it, Mr. Weber. It's very difficult. Being on Zoom is very difficult because it doesn't put people on a level playing field. I think we socially distance in council chambers, but I don't like the fact that if you're on Zoom, like Ms. Dockler, I presume is on Zoom, it's very difficult to even know that they're there. And so...
But if we're all on Zoom, it's an even playing field, as you said.
Yes, that is a fact. Again, I'll leave that up to a future discussion. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. I guess I could speak to that briefly. I don't really feel comfortable sitting at home in front of my computer, zooming in when we're asking city staff, public works, all types of essential employees to be coming into work every day while we sit at home on our computers. I think that's the exact wrong message to be sending. I think we're doing things safe here. And that would be my opinion, but we can certainly have that discussion. Sounds like, I want to give a thanks to the Alaris Center staff as well. They put 11,000 people through there already. They're expecting, somewhere between 8,000 and 11,000 tomorrow. I really hope that no matter the result of the election, that our country can come together, because it's been a really bad number of years, and I think it's been long before Trump, this division that has grown, and I really hope that we can, looking back at how we came together after 9/11 as a country, I mean, really this pandemic should be another defining moment for our country where we can come together, and I really hope that that starts tomorrow with Election Day. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm guessing Dana doesn't actually want 2.5-hour meetings, so we'll try not to do that in the future, but thank you everybody for being here, and stay safe. Yep, we have a 10 adjournment. We have a motion from Mr. President Sandy and a second from Mr. Weber. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Adjourned.